Constance Hopkins is kissing her way through all the men in Plymouth. What will happen? Today's Plymouth book is a little bit of a surprise. It's Constance, A Story of Early Plymouth by Patricia Clapp. And I found this book by complete accident because I had read another Patricia Clapp book that I really enjoyed. And so when I saw that she wrote a fictional Pilgrim story, I thought I for sure had to read it. Now the other book I read by her, it was called Jane Emily, or it might have been Emily Jane. And it's more of a young adult kind of ghost story thriller mystery. And it is about a young girl who goes to stay at her grandmother's house, and she becomes possessed by the spirit of her dead aunt who died as a child. You would have no idea that the author of that wrote this, unless you knew who the author was. A completely different feel, and just the writing just seemed different. I think Emily Jane was written before this. I'm not sure, but this seems like it was more in the author's earlier works, just because it wasn't as good. And this book has a huge following on the internet. There's people who read this book over and over, like annually, and love this book, which I had no idea. I only learned about that when looking at reviews on Goodreads. So if this is your favorite book, I'm really sorry. I didn't like it though. But there are some things about Constance I did like. So let's start with the good, and then we'll get to the bad. But first, Constance was a real person. She was a 14-year-old girl, came over on the Mayflower, and there weren't a lot of women and young girls in Plymouth Colony, so she was kind of in a unique position to find a husband. Don't know if it was quite as romantic and dramatic as this book makes it sound, but that would be true. We have no idea what she would have looked like, and we don't really know anything about her personality, so this is pretty much complete fiction in that sense. The author, though, is a descendant of Constance, so that's kind of interesting. But if you know anything about history or Plymouth, you're going to know what her married last name is, so the romance octagon that she's in isn't going to be any big surprise as to who it works out to that she marries. And that's kind of the problem with historical fiction. You already know what's going to happen. So it was very interesting, a lot of the actual events that the author wove into the book. I found that very interesting. The sickness that the Pilgrims experienced their first winter, that was a really good section. It just made it seem more real and kind of more human to me, having it seen through this young girl's experience. But it did have a little more impact on me reading it in this book as opposed to some of the history books I've already read. So that's one reason I would say to read this. It adds a lot of emotion and feeling to those events that you don't really get in a dry sort of history book. I also thought it was really interesting. So when her family came, they had two indentured servants, Edward Doty and Edward Leicester, that came with them on the Mayflower and lived with them once their home was built. The two young men slept up in a loft in their house, and they were young men, and she's a young teenage girl, which I'd never really thought about. So in real life, the two Edwards fought a duel, and it's recorded in Plymouth history. You can read about it. But I haven't anyways, ever been able to find the reason for the duel, and I never really thought much of the reason for the duel. But it was very creative that the duel would be over Constance, I thought. Silly, but creative. I liked it though, I guess. So one more thing I really enjoyed was the most perfect description of Plymouth in spring, summer that I've read. And I think this author must have been here to know this. Must have come to visit Plymouth. So this is what she says spring is like in Plymouth. But here, it seems, every bird God ever fashioned tumbled its songs out of the thick trees. Beneath them, carpets of pine needles press softly under my feet, and I can find patches of violets and fragile white flowers shaped like pipes, and others like delicate slipper for a lady. Ferns uncurl their fingers in the cool shade, and there is the heady smell of wild mint near the brook. And always, always, there is the fresh, cool, clean, salt scent of the sea, mixed with the odor of sun-warmed pines. I never really knew spring until this New England. That is so accurate. That is, even the smell the author caught. I would add beach roses to that in the spring. Beach roses and mint and ocean air and pine needles is what Plymouth smells like. So if someone's going to make a candle, a Plymouth scented candle, those are the scents that you need. Plymouth, we'll call it Plymouth in spring. So this book really overall seemed very silly to me. And Constance, she just did not seem like a likable person to me. She was so preoccupied with kissing as many of the men in Plymouth as she possibly could. It seemed unrealistic. Would a young girl back in the early 1600s really put her reputation on the line by going around and kissing all these men in the moonlight? I kind of don't think so. Like, that would be dangerous for her, I think. She wouldn't be a very smart girl to go around doing that back then. And she's kind of in a survival situation. It was really, really tough those first few years. It was like a life or death survival situation. And she's not thinking about who would make a good match for her. She's only thinking about how wonderful kisses are. It's just silly. It was just like this author wanted to make her great granny like the Scarlett O'Hara of Plymouth Plantation. So personally, I wouldn't be giving this book to any young relatives I have. But I mean, if you read it and you like it, that's fine. I understand. We all like different sorts of books. Romance isn't my particular favorite category of literature, so I might be missing something here. And it was worth reading for that one section, like I said, about the sickness. And if you're into Plymouth books like me, you know, you want to be complete, you gotta read Constance. You don't really have a choice. You gotta read this, I guess, if you're trying to read all of the books written about Plymouth. Oh, by the way, I broke my fingers, if you're wondering what's going on with my hand. The back of the book says, an absorbing historical romance. I don't know how absorbing it is, to be honest. Constance is an engaging, high-spirited heroine and a fine historical novel written with verve and fresh imagination. Well, there was plenty of imagination with writing this book. She seems more like a annoying, spoiled brat than a high-spirited heroine, but, you know, as I said, everyone is entitled to their own view. Give Constance a chance or not, the choice is up to you.
If you see this ghoul, play it cool.